I opened my eyes to the smell of burnt coffee and the sound of Josephine practicing violin in the next room. The same morning routine I'd followed for 12 years, ever since she was born. I was Grant Hood, a restoration architect who spent his days bringing condemned buildings back to life, a fitting metaphor for what I was about to do with my own existence, though I didn't know it yet. My wife, Erica, stood at the kitchen counter, her phone pressed against her ear as she whispered urgently in Spanish. She'd been doing that more often lately, these hushed conversations that ended the moment I entered her room. I'd attributed it to stress about my father Curtis's declining health. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer didn't leave much room for pleasant phone calls. "Morning," I said, kissing her cheek. She pulled away slightly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Your father called. He wants us all at the house Friday night. Dinner with my family." My stomach tightened. Dinners with the Calderons were exercises in tolerance. Ricardo, my father-in-law, held court like some deposed monarch, his wife Phyllis nodding along to his pronouncements about my career choices, our modest home, my inability to provide Erica with the lifestyle she deserved. Their son Garrett usually arrived drunk, and their daughter Candace spent the entire evening on her phone, occasionally emerging to make passive-aggressive comments about how Josephine needed to lose weight. He specifically asked, I said, insisted, said it was important. Erica's eyes wouldn't meet mine. You know how he gets. I didn't know. Curtis Forbes had been a longshoreman for 40 years, a man who communicated in grunts and firm handshakes. His insistence on formal dinner conversation meant something significant was happening. Friday arrived with the weight of an anvil. I picked Curtis up from his hospice facility, shocked as always by how much smaller he seemed each visit. The cancer had eaten away at him, leaving behind a brittle framework of the man who'd taught me to throw a curveball and change a tire. "You doing okay, Pop?" I asked as we drove toward the Calderon house in Newport Beach, their waterfront property a constant reminder of the wealth gap between our families. "I'm dying, Grant, but I've got something to say before I do." His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard in months. Been waiting for the right moment. The Calderon house gleamed white and massive against the evening sky. Ricardo had made his fortune in commercial real estate, though the exact details of his business dealings had always remained vague. Garrett's red Porsche sat in the driveway, a gift from his parents for his 30th birthday, despite his 3 DUIs. Next to it sat a pristine boat trailer, empty. "They got a new boat," Curtis observed, his voice flat. Inside, Phyllis had set out an elaborate spread. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, expensive wine. She air-kissed my cheeks while assessing my off-the-rack sport coat with barely concealed disdain. "Grant, darling, still doing that building thing." She had a way of making my profession sound like a hobby. "Restoration architecture, yes." How quaint. She turned to Josephine, who just walked in carrying her violin case. "Sweetie, are you still doing that high school orchestra? Shouldn't you be thinking about your future? College applications are coming up." Josephine, my brilliant daughter who'd inherited my stubbornness and Erica's dark eyes, smiled politely. "I've been thinking about it a lot. Actually, Grandma Phyllis." Ricardo emerged from his study, scotch in hand. "Curtis, you're looking, well, you're here." "Grant." He shook my hand with the grip of a man, proving something. "Heard you landed that project downtown, turning a crack house into condos. Historic renovation of a 1920s apartment building." I corrected. "Same thing." He laughed, and Garrett joined in from the couch, already 3 drinks deep. We gathered around the dining table, the crystal and china reflecting the chandelier's light. Erica sat between her mother and sister Candace, who was showing them something on her phone, photos of what appeared to be a yacht. "That's the new boat," Ricardo announced proudly. 42-footer, Marina Del Rey. "Cost a pretty penny, but we've earned it. It's beautiful," Erica said, and something in her voice made my skin prickle. Curtis had been quiet through the appetizers, methodically cutting his prime rib into small pieces he barely touched. Now he set down his knife with a deliberate clink that silenced the table. "Where's the $50,000 for my granddaughter's college fund?" he said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of traffic from Pacific Coast Highway seemed to fade away. "What money?" I heard myself ask, my voice coming from somewhere distant. Curtis reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, his hands trembling slightly. He emptied it onto the table. Bank statements, deposit slips, meticulously organized in chronological order. 7 years' worth. Every month, he said, his voice stronger now, I deposited money into the account Ricardo here convinced me to set up. Special education fund for Josephine. High-interest savings, he said. Better returns than anything I could get at my bank. 7 years, grant. $600 a month, sometimes more when I had it. Birthdays, Christmas bonuses, overtime shifts. I reached for the statements with numb fingers. The deposits were all there, documented in Curtis's careful handwriting on the slips. $600 on the 15th of every month, sometimes $700, occasionally $1,000. All deposited into an account at Pacific Coast Bank. Account number matching the one Ricardo had written on a business card I found clipped to the first statement. I don't understand, I said, but I was beginning to. You told me this was for her future, Curtis continued, his eyes locked on Ricardo. You said the account would grow, that she'd have something for college, for her music school applications. I worked double shifts for this, Ricardo. I went back to the docs even after my diagnosis because I wanted to make sure she had enough. Ricardo's face had gone the color of the prime rib, rare and bloody. Curtis, this is hardly the time. When will be the time? When I'm dead. Curtis's laugh was bitter. I called Pacific Coast Bank last week. Had them check the account. You want to know what they told me? Dad. Erica said, her voice strained. Maybe we should discuss this privately. No. Curtis slammed his palm on the table, making the crystal jump. I'm dying, and I want to know where my granddaughter's money went. Because according to the bank, that account's been empty for 3 years. Cleaned out. Transferred to another account in, let me see. He squinted at another paper. In Ricardo and Phyllis Calderon's names. That's a lot. Phyllis shrieked, but her eyes were already tearing up, guilty and afraid. I looked at Erica. My wife of 14 years, mother of my child, the woman I'd built my life around. Her face told me everything. You knew, I said. Grant, it's not what you think. The boat, Curtis said quietly. 42-footer. Marina Del Rey. Want to guess how much a boat like that costs? Garrett stood up suddenly, knocking his chair backward. You can't prove anything, old man. You're probably confused. The cancer's in your brain by now, right? Pancreatic, I said, my voice ice cold. And his mind is perfectly clear. Josephine had been silent through all of this, her face pale, her hands folded on the table in front of her untouched plate. Now, she stood up, and everyone turned to look at her. My daughter, who'd spent 12 years of her life practicing violin 4 hours a day, who'd won state competitions, who'd been talking about Juilliard since she was 10 years old. My daughter, who'd been told her entire life that Grandpa Curtis was saving for her future. She looked at Ricardo, then at Phyllis, then at her mother. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, cutting through the chaos like a blade. I've been accepted to Juilliard's pre-college program, she said. Full scholarship. I start in January. The screaming started immediately. Phyllis shrieked that Josephine was lying, that she would never get into such a program. Ricardo shouted about disrespect and family loyalty. Candace called Josephine a spoiled brat. Garrett lunged toward Curtis, yelling about lawsuits and slander. But I only watched Erica, saw the shock and betrayal cross her face, not at her family, but at her daughter, at the secret Josephine had kept, the triumph she'd hidden until this exact moment. And I understood that my daughter had known. Maybe not the specifics, maybe not the dollar amounts, but she'd known her trust fund was a lie. She'd heard the whispered conversations, seen the guilty looks, put the pieces together the way smart kids always do. She'd prepared for this moment. I didn't need their money, Josephine said, looking directly at her mother. I never did. I just needed people who believed in me. The dinner dissolved into chaos. Ricardo threatened legal action. Phyllis wept dramatically. Garrett had to be physically restrained by 2 neighbors who came running at the noise. Erica tried to explain, to justify, her words tumbling over each other in English and Spanish until they meant nothing at all. I gathered my father and my daughter, and we walked out. In the car, Curtis was quiet, his breathing labored. Josephine sat in the back, staring out the window. I drove on autopilot. My mind tried to process what had just happened. How long have you known? I finally asked Josephine. 2 years. I heard Grandma Phyllis on the phone with Mom, talking about the boat. She said something like Curtis's money finally paid off. She paused. I started practicing more after that. Applied for every scholarship I could find. I wasn't going to let them ruin my life. Pride and heartbreak warred in my chest. You should have told me. I thought you knew, she said quietly. I thought everyone knew but me. I pulled over, my hands shaking too hard to drive safely. Curtis reached over and gripped my shoulder. I'm sorry, son. I should have checked the account years ago. I trusted them. We all did, I said. But even as I said it, I was thinking about Erica's hushed phone calls, her defensiveness whenever I questioned her family, the way she always needed just a little more money, always had some emergency that required a few hundred here, 1,000 there. I thought about how she'd push back when I suggested Josephine apply for scholarships, insisting that family would take care of it. I thought about the man I'd been that morning, Grant Hood, restoration architect, devoted husband and father, someone who fixed broken things for a living. That man was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who understood that some structures were too damaged to save. They needed to be torn down completely, razed to the foundation, so something better could be built in their place. I started the car again and drove Curtis back to hospice. Josephine came with me to help him inside. In his room, surrounded by the beeping machines and medicinal smell, Curtis grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Make them pay, he whispered. Not for me, for her. I looked at Josephine, my daughter who'd survived her own family's betrayal with grace and determination, who'd built her own future when the one promised to her crumbled. I will, I promised. And I meant it. The next morning, I went to work as usual. The historic Biltmore Apartments downtown needed someone who understood the difference between restoration and renovation, someone who could see the bones of a building and imagine what it could become. I'd always been good at seeing potential in ruins. Now I needed to apply those skills to my own life. I called my lawyer first, an old college friend named Kerry Hunter who specialized in family law. I'd helped him renovate his office building 3 years ago, and we'd stayed close. Over coffee at a downtown cafe, I laid out the situation. Kerry listened without interrupting, making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he sat back and whistled low. Okay, he said. First question, what do you want? Everything, I said. I want my daughter's money back. I want Erica held accountable. I want the Calderons to face consequences. The money's gone, Grant. Spent on a boat, probably other things. You might be able to force a sale of assets, but that's a long legal process. I'm not talking about legal consequences, I said quietly. Kerry studied me. Be careful. I'm ethically obligated to advise against anything illegal. Then don't advise, I said. Just listen. I spent the weekend in my office, avoiding the house, screening Erica's calls. She left voicemails that progressed from apologetic to angry to desperate. I deleted them all without listening to more than a few seconds. Josephine stayed with Curtis at hospice. She called Sunday night. Dad, Grandpa wants to talk to you. Curtis's voice was weaker than it had been Friday. Grant, I need to tell you something about Ricardo. About his business. What about it? He's not as clean as he looks. Back in the 80s, I worked a job unloading containers at the port. Ricardo was working for a development company then, before he started his own firm. There were things, shipments that came in late at night, paperwork that didn't match the cargo. I kept my mouth shut because that's what you did, but I remembered. You think he's dirty? I think everyone has secrets, son. The question is whether you're willing to dig for them. I was. Monday morning, I hired a private investigator, a woman named Francine Bliss who came recommended by Kerry. Francine was in her 50s, a former cop who'd left the force under circumstances she didn't elaborate on. She had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen humanity's worst and stopped being surprised by it. Real estate fraud is common, she said when I met her at her office in Long Beach, especially among guys who came up in the 80s. Lots of dirty money got laundered through property deals back then. If your father-in-law was connected to any of it, there'll be records. How long will it take? Depends on how careful he was. Give me 2 weeks, maybe 3. I didn't have 3 weeks. Curtis was fading fast, and I wanted him to see the beginning of this, at least. I wanted him to know that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. I'll pay double for 1 week, I said. Francine smiled. Now you're speaking my language. I went home Tuesday night to pack some clothes. Erica was waiting in the living room, her eyes red from crying. We need to talk, she said. No, we don't. Grant, please. It's not what you think. My father, he said the investment wasn't performing well, that we needed to move the money to protect it. I thought he was helping by buying a boat. I didn't know about the boat until Friday. My mother must have. She stopped, hearing how it sounded. Okay, I knew something was wrong. But it's my family, Grant. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations. My father said we could pay Curtis back, that we'd make it right. When I interrupted, when were we going to make it right? After Curtis died? After Josephine gave up on college? When exactly? I was trying to protect you. You're always so rigid about money, about doing everything the right way. I thought I could fix it before you found out. By lying to me for 7 years. Her face crumpled. I love you. I love our daughter. This was supposed to help us. Help us? Or help them? I grabbed my suitcase. I'm staying at a hotel. My lawyer will be in touch. You can't leave me, she said, panic rising in her voice. We have a daughter. We have a life together. We had a life, I said. You sold it for a boat. I walked out, got in my car, and drove to the extended stay near my office. It smelled like disinfectant and sad business trips, but it was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Carrie called Wednesday morning. Erica's attorney reached out. She wants to mediate. No. Grant, listen. Mediation could. I said no. File for divorce. Full custody of Josephine. I want the house, and I want documentation of every financial transaction Erica's made with her family in the last decade. That's aggressive. They stole from a dying man. From his granddaughter. Aggression seems appropriate. Carrie sighed. I'll file the papers. But Grant, be smart about this. Don't do anything you can't take back. Too late for that, I thought. Francine called Thursday afternoon. You were right about your father-in-law, she said. Ricardo Calderon has been very creative with his accounting. I found 3 properties purchased in the late 90s with cash. Unusual for someone who claims to have built his wealth through conventional mortgages. The properties were sold within 2 years for significant profits, but the capital gains taxes don't match the reported income. Tax evasion? Probably. Also found some interesting shell companies. Pacific Holdings, Calderon Ventures, Newport Development Group, all registered to addresses that don't exist or lead back to mail forwarding services. Classic laundering setup. Can you prove it? I can document it. Proving it's someone else's job, like the IRS or the FBI. Send me everything you have. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the disastrous dinner, I drove to Marina del Rey. The Calderon's boat sat in its slip, gleaming white and beautiful, named Phyllis's Dream in elegant script. I took photos from every angle, documented the slip number and registration. Then I called the IRS tip line. I'd like to report suspected tax fraud, I said, and gave them Ricardo Calderon's name, business addresses, and everything Francine had found. I mentioned the boat, the properties, the shell companies. I mentioned that I was willing to provide documentation and testimony. The agent on the other end sounded bored until I mentioned the dollar amounts. Then she perked up. We'll need you to submit a formal report, she said. Form 3949A. You can file it online. I'll have it to you by Monday, I said. I hung up and sat in my car, looking at Phyllis's Dream bobbing gently in its slip. $50,000 of my father's money, transformed into fiberglass and mahogany. Not for long. Curtis died the following Tuesday. He went peacefully, Josephine holding one hand and me holding the other. His last words were, make sure she knows I'm proud of her. The funeral was small. A few of Curtis's old friends from the docks, some of my colleagues, Carrie and his wife. Josephine played a violin piece, Bach's Chaconne, impossibly difficult and heartbreakingly beautiful. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Erica showed up with her family. I'd expected her, but seeing Ricardo and Phyllis in their expensive black clothes, dabbing at dry eyes with handkerchiefs, made my blood boil. Garrett didn't bother with the pretense of grief, checking his phone throughout the service. Candace whispered to her mother constantly, both of them shooting poisonous looks at Josephine. At the reception afterward, Ricardo approached me. "Grant, I want you to know how sorry I am for your loss. Curtis was a good man." I looked at him, really looked at him. Ricardo Calderon, who'd built his life on lies and other people's money, who'd stolen from a dying man without losing a night's sleep. "You're right," I said. "He was a good man. That's why he trusted you." Ricardo's smile faltered. "I understand you're upset about the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I kept my voice low, controlled. "Is that what you call theft now?" "Now see here." He puffed up, ready to bluster. "No, you see here." I stepped closer. "I know about Pacific Holdings. I know about the properties in Newport and Costa Mesa. I know about the tax returns that don't match your actual income. I know everything, Ricardo." His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will." I smiled. Soon, I walked away, leaving him standing there like a deflating balloon. Phyllis cornered Josephine near the dessert table. I was too far away to hear what she said, but I saw my daughter's face go tight with anger. I started toward them, but Josephine held up a hand, stopping me. "Grandma," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "if you're going to cry at Grandpa Curtis's funeral, at least make the tears real. He deserved that much." Phyllis gasped like she'd been slapped. Candace rushed over, ready to defend her mother, but Josephine had already turned away. That night, Josephine and I sat in Curtis's empty house, surrounded by a lifetime of accumulated possessions. The hospice had sent his things in boxes, clothes, books, the photo albums he'd kept of her childhood. "I found this," Josephine said, handing me an envelope. It was in his nightstand. Inside was a letter written in Curtis's shaky handwriting. "Grant, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't waste time being sad. I had a good run, and I got to see my granddaughter grow into someone special. That's more than most men get. The money doesn't matter. Josephine will succeed because she's brilliant and determined, not because of some bank account. But the principle matters. These people need to learn they can't steal from others without consequences. You're a builder, son. You fix things. But some things can't be fixed. Some things need to be torn down. Don't be afraid to do what's necessary. And don't be afraid to be happy after. Love, Curtis." I read it twice, then handed it to Josephine. She read it silently, tears streaming down her face. "He wanted you to be happy," she said. "I will be," I promised. The next morning, I received an email from an IRS agent named Mohammed Bowen. They were opening an investigation into Ricardo Calderon's business dealings. They'd need to interview me, examine the documentation I'd provided, possibly depose other witnesses. "This could take months," Agent Bowen said when we spoke on the phone. "Tax cases are complex." "I have time," I said, but I was lying. I didn't want to wait months. I wanted Ricardo to feel the walls closing in now, wanted him to know what was coming. So I made another call. "Garrett Calderon?" I said when he answered, his voice thick with hangover at 2 in the afternoon. "Who's this?" "Grant Hood. We need to talk about your father." "Fuck off." He started to hang up. "I know about the DUIs," I said quickly. "The third one that got buried. The one from last year that should have put you in prison." Silence. "How do you?" "My investigator is very good. Want to know what else she found? The hit and run in Laguna Beach. The one where you totaled someone's car and your father paid them off to keep quiet. You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can." Francine tracked down the victim, got their story on record. She also found the mechanic who repaired your Porsche, the one who noticed the paint transfer and kept photos because he thought it looked suspicious. More silence. "What do you want?" Garrett finally asked. "Information. About your father's business. About where the money really comes from." "He'll kill me." "The IRS will kill him," I said. "Better to be on the right side of this when it happens. Meet me tomorrow." "Come alone." He hung up without agreeing, but I knew he'd show. Bullies always folded when someone called their bluff. I was right. Garrett met me at a coffee shop in Huntington Beach the next day, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. He ordered 3 espressos and drank them like medicine. "My father's going to find out I'm talking to you," he said. "Your father's going to have bigger problems soon." Garrett laughed bitterly. You don't know him. He always finds a way out. Always. Not this time. Now talk. Where does the money come from? What Garrett told me over the next hour painted a picture of systematic fraud stretching back decades. Ricardo had started legitimately working in commercial real estate development. But in the late 80s, when money was easy and oversight was lax, he made connections with people who needed to move cash quietly. Drug money. Mostly, though Garrett didn't know all the details. Ricardo would buy properties with the dirty money through shell companies, hold them for a year or two, then sell them at inflated prices to other shell companies or legitimate buyers. The profits got run through more businesses, a car dealership that failed, a restaurant that barely operated, a construction company that bid on jobs it never won. Each transaction left the money a little cleaner, a little harder to trace. He got sloppy in the 90s, Garrett said. Almost got caught. That's when he started being more careful, spreading things out. But the fundamentals haven't changed. And the college fund? Garrett looked ashamed for the first time. He saw an opportunity. Curtis was offering free money, no strings attached. Dad convinced him to use our bank, said he'd set up a special account. But he just created a regular savings account and kept the login information. Transferred everything to himself over time. With Erica's knowledge, Mom told her after the first year. Erica didn't like it, but he shrugged. Family. You don't rat out family. Unless family rats themselves out, I thought. I need you to testify to all of this, I said. Are you insane? My father is going down whether you help or not. The question is whether you go down with him. I leaned forward. Francine found 6 different criminal acts you've committed in the last 3 years alone. Help me, and that information stays buried. Refuse, and it ends up on the desk of every prosecutor in Orange County. Garrett's hands were shaking. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a deal. Take it or don't. He took it. Of course he did. Over the next week, I assembled my case like I would a building restoration, carefully, methodically, making sure every piece fit perfectly. Francine provided documentation. Garrett provided testimony and insider knowledge. I provided the narrative that tied it all together. The IRS moved slower than I wanted, but they moved. Ricardo received his first official audit notice 2 weeks after Curtis's funeral. I heard about it from Candace of all people, who called me screaming about how I destroyed her family. Good, I said and hung up. Erica tried to act as intermediary, begging me to drop whatever I was doing. We met for coffee at her insistence, a public place where she thought I wouldn't make a scene. You're tearing my family apart, she said. I didn't steal $50,000. I didn't lie for 7 years. I didn't betray the man who worked himself to death to provide for his granddaughter. I sipped my coffee. Your family tore itself apart. I'm just making sure everyone sees the damage. Josephine needs her mother. Josephine has her mother. The question is whether her mother is worth having. Erica's face hardened. You've changed. You're cruel now. No, I said. I'm just done being the person everyone thought they could use. I stood to leave. Erica grabbed my wrist. I loved you, she said. I still love you. I looked at her hand on my wrist, at the diamond ring I'd saved for 6 months to buy, at the wedding band that matched mine. I loved you too, I said. But love isn't enough when there's no trust left. I pulled free and walked away. The IRS investigation snowballed. Once agents started pulling threads, the whole fabric unraveled. Ricardo's shell companies, his off-book transactions, his unreported income. It all came tumbling out. The audit became a criminal investigation. The criminal investigation brought in the FBI. 3 months after Curtis's death, federal agents raided Ricardo's office and his home. They seized documents, computers, financial records. They froze his bank accounts. They impounded Phyllis's dream and put a lien on the Newport Beach house. I watched it on the news with Josephine, who'd moved in with me at the extended stay until the divorce was finalized and I could buy us a new house. She was practicing for her Juilliard audition, her violin filling the small room with beauty. Dad, she said during a break, do you ever feel bad about what's happening to them? I thought about it honestly. No. Do you? I did at first. Grandma Phyllis is probably going to lose her house. Aunt Candace has been crying on Instagram for weeks. She paused. But then I think about Grandpa Curtis working extra shifts when he was already sick, thinking he was building something for me. And I think about how they spent his money on a boat they used maybe 5 times. That's the difference between them and us, I said. We feel bad. They never did. The divorce proceedings were ugly. Erica fought for half of everything despite having contributed to the destruction of our finances through her family's fraud. Her lawyer argued that she'd been manipulated by Ricardo, that she was a victim too. Carrie demolished that argument with phone records showing Erica had discussed the account transfers with her mother dozens of times over the years, with bank statements proving she'd personally received gifts from her parents totaling nearly $20,000, money that almost certainly came from Curtis's fund. The judge was not sympathetic. I got the house, primary custody of Josephine, and a divorce decree that made sure Erica wouldn't see a penny of Curtis's estate, which wasn't much, but it was the principle that mattered. Ricardo's trial was set for the fall. Garrett had agreed to testify against his father in exchange for immunity. The family fractured along predictable lines. Phyllis stood by Ricardo, insisting he was being framed. Candace blamed everyone but her parents. Erica tried to stay neutral, which meant she ended up isolated from everyone. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger projects, using Curtis's life insurance money to buy into a partnership in my firm. Josephine thrived at Juilliard's pre-college program, coming home on weekends with stories about famous teachers and talented peers. One evening, 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, Josephine and I sat on the balcony of our new apartment overlooking downtown. We downsized from the house. I didn't want the memories, but the view was better, and Josephine said the acoustics were perfect for practice. Mom called today, Josephine said. She wants to meet for lunch. Do you want to? I don't know. She's my mom, but... She trailed off. She made her choices. You don't owe her forgiveness, I said. But you don't owe her hatred either. Whatever you feel is valid. What do you feel? I considered. Sad, angry, relieved, all of it at once. Do you think you'll ever trust anyone again? The question hit harder than I expected. I trust you. That's not what I mean. I knew what she meant. Would I ever fall in love again? Ever open myself up to that kind of vulnerability? The honest answer was I didn't know. Maybe, I said. Someday. When I'm ready. Good, Josephine said. Grandpa Curtis would want you to be happy. She was right. Curtis had written as much in his letter. Don't be afraid to be happy after. I was working on it. Ricardo's trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Josephine, watching the prosecution systematically destroy the image Ricardo had built over decades. They presented evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, and theft. They showed how he'd stolen from Curtis, from business partners, from anyone who trusted him. Garrett's testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Ricardo had taught him to lie, to cheat, to see other people as marks. How family loyalty meant covering up crimes and attacking anyone who threatened to expose them. Ricardo's defense tried to paint him as a victim of changing regulations, of overzealous prosecutors, of a son's betrayal. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge gave Ricardo 12 years in federal prison, ordered him to pay back taxes and penalties totaling over $3 million, and mandated restitution to his victims, including $50,000 to Josephine's college fund, with interest. Phyllis lost the house, the boat, everything. She moved in with Candace, who still blamed everyone but her parents. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd become bitter and paranoid, convinced I'd orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy against her innocent family. Let her think that, I thought. Better than admitting the truth. Erica reached out after the sentencing, asking if we could talk. I met her at the same coffee shop where we had our last real conversation. She looked older, tired. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she wore no makeup. Thank you, she said. I blinked. For what? For not dragging me down with them. Your lawyer could have pushed for criminal charges against me, but you didn't. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Josephine. She doesn't need both parents in prison. Erica nodded. I know. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand how I let it happen, how I chose them over you and her. Good luck with that, I said, not unkindly. It takes courage to look at yourself honestly. Are we? She hesitated. Can we ever be friends? No, I said, but we can be civil. For Josephine. That's more than I deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. We finished our coffee in silence. When we parted, she tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Some boundaries, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Life continued. Josephine graduated from her pre-college program with honors and accepted a full scholarship to Juilliard for her undergraduate degree. Curtis's restitution money, along with what I'd saved, was enough to cover her living expenses in New York. The firm made me a full partner. I hired an associate fresh out of architecture school, a bright kid named Phil Baird who reminded me of myself at that age, idealistic, talented, eager to restore the broken. Why restoration? Phil asked me one day as we toured a condemned Victorian in Pasadena, why not just tear it down and build new? I thought about Curtis's letter, about things that needed to be torn down versus things that needed to be saved. Because some things are worth saving, I said. You just have to know the difference. 2 years after the trial, I met someone, Anna Rivers, a structural engineer who consulted on one of my projects. She was smart, funny, brutally honest. She knew about my past. Everyone in the industry did by then, and she didn't care. We've all got damage, she said on our third date. The question is what you do with it. And what do you do with yours? I asked. I build around it. Reinforce the weak spots. Make something stronger than it was before. I kissed her then, in the middle of a downtown restaurant, not caring who saw. Josephine approved. She and Anna hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of precision and structure. When Josephine came home for holidays, the three of us would cook elaborate meals and argue about music versus mathematics, art versus engineering. I think Grandpa Curtis would like her, Josephine said one evening. I think he would too, I agreed. The third anniversary of Curtis's death, Josephine and I visited his grave. We brought flowers, roses, his favorite, and a bottle of bourbon, which we poured on the grass the way Curtis had taught me to toast the dead. We did it, Grandpa, Josephine said softly. Made them pay. I thought about Ricardo in prison, about Phyllis losing everything, about Erica's hollow apology. I thought about the years of work it had taken to expose them, the toll it had exacted. Yes, I said. We did. Was it worth it? I looked at my daughter, brilliant and successful, standing on the foundation Curtis had tried to build for her. I thought about Anna, waiting for us at home with dinner. I thought about my business, my life, the future I was building from the rubble of the past. Every bit, I said. We stood in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the cemetery. Finally, Josephine spoke again. I'm glad he lived long enough to know, she said, that we were going to fight back. Me too. We left as darkness fell, walking together toward the car. Josephine linked her arm through mine. Dad, I know you did most of this for me, for Grandpa Curtis, but I hope some of it was for you too. I hope you got something out of it. I thought about the man I'd been 3 years ago, naive, trusting, willing to overlook red flags because it was easier than confronting hard truths. That man was gone, torn down like a condemned building. In his place was someone stronger, someone who understood that restoration sometimes meant destruction first. Someone who'd learned that justice wasn't always legal, that revenge didn't always feel good, but that both were sometimes necessary. I got closure, I said, and that's enough. We drove home through the Los Angeles night, the city lights spreading out below us like stars. Tomorrow, Anna and I were viewing a property together, both professional and personal, blurring the lines between restoration and renovation, between what was broken and what could be built. Josephine turned on the radio, some classical piece I didn't recognize. She hummed along, already analyzing the composition in her head. I smiled. Curtis had wanted her to have a future. Despite everything, despite the theft and betrayal and lies, she had one. We both did, and it was better than anything Ricardo Calderon's money could have bought. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.